cute. You get to be kids. They clap for nothing. You don't have to do anything. Just be kids. Wouldn't it be cool to just have their problems, right? No. Stop. Huh? Yeah, I was setting you up. I know. They are our problem. We've been talking a few weeks. Pardon me, I have a cough drop in my mouth. I found one. If I didn't find a cough drop, it was going to be shorter. How many of y'all didn't set your clocks? That's how you know who has a smartphone and uses it for their alarm. See, we know something about being smart now. You just depend on technology. No, that's right. We figured. But we've been talking about the church for about 4 weeks now, and what the church means, and if it's what kind of big deal it is in our lives, and what it means in your communities, and what it means to you, and how you interact with it. So, if you want to get involved in some of those messages, you can go back on the website and check them out and see if you really agree with me or not. What we started Wednesday was open season on Pastor Sean. So it's cool. Every Wednesday night now, what we're going to do is give you the opportunity to raise your hand and go, Sunday you said, and then you get to read it back to me, and I have to defend it. That means you got to take good notes. You can't lie. And you get to ask all the questions that you're going to generate in your mind today. Okay? Or the what ifs, or the what about this? Did you think about this? And then you and I will have a discussion amongst with a group. And that is our Bible study on Wednesday nights now for a while. So be sure and do that and come participate in what we call open season on Pastor Sean. Sherry Ann's not allowed to be there anymore. She gets open season on Pastor Sean every day. But we talked about the church, and we're looking at Acts. Today we're going to look at another book in Galatians and talk about the church and its problem, meaning your problem, not the church's problem. I'm kind of over the church has problems. Like our organization has problems. We can't decide what color to paint the pews or the walls, or what color to do. That's a church problem, and I'm so over those. I don't even give them benefit of the doubt. You got a problem like that, you win. You can have it. I don't care. So we're not even talking about those kind of problems. We're done with those. We're talking about problems that you, the church, have. Your life problems, what that looks like, the big problems in your life. And we started this thing talking about how the church got started, and how in Acts there was just a couple hundred people who flooded the streets of Jerusalem and said, hey, there was a guy just a couple of weeks ago. You crucified him. You killed him completely dead, and you buried him, and then all of a sudden he rose back up. And then he went on up into heaven, and he's waiting for us. And that was the culmination of the whole story. That was the life of Jesus. That's why he came on the planet. He did not come on the planet so that he could do miracles. He did not come on the planet so that he could live a perfect life. He had to do all of that. That was required in order to do why he really came, and that was to die. The stuff of Jesus' life was just the story of Jesus' life. You and I go around and want to do exactly what Jesus did. Well, if you want to do exactly what Jesus did, you're going to have to live a perfect life, and you're going to have to die for all humankind. Anybody able to do that? Then quit trying to do what Jesus did. I don't even care about your individual, well, Jesus would do it this way. Well, if Jesus would do it that way, then do it, okay? But just act as if Jesus is in your life, and you don't have to worry about what Jesus would do if he were here. He's not here. Unless you're representing him in your heart through his Spirit, then he's here. Then we already know what Jesus would do. All you have to do is listen to him. But that was their message. That's what got this whole thing going. Jesus died, he was buried, he rose again, he went up into heaven, he's coming back for us. And because he did that, I have peace with God, I have a great joy in my life, and I get to live, and you can't knock me down. That's the story, that's your story. That's the church's story. To the world out there, Jesus died for me. Not just for my sins, but for me. He took care of my sins too. But he died for me. And I have peace with God and joy that's overflowing, and it's awesome. And that's your message. That's not the message that the world seems to be getting. And that's your big problem. They don't get that message. They don't get the message that you have an absolutely better life than they do. Because you complain about your life just as much as they do. You have a problem living on the planet just like they do. You worry about money just as much as they do. You have fear of your life just as they do. You're worried about who's in power just as they are. So your message is not getting out right. Your message is not like it should be. And that's our problem. Our problem needs to be solved with one solution. We're going to show you what that solution is. So if you're not taking notes now, you ought to start taking notes. Because if you realize you have a problem, who would not want to fix their problem? And I'm not saying I'm going to give you the answer to the problem. I'm going to show you what the answer to the problem is. It's been written for a long time. These early believers knew the answer to the problem, and they knew how to change their life so that the other people around them were looking at their life and going, wow, the message they're telling me is true because their life is different than mine. They are walking around this same planet under the Roman Empire, who is killing people left and right. If you didn't look at Rome the right way, they could chop your head off and not care one bit about you. They didn't have to, there was no judicial process. They could do what they wanted to do, and Caesar could actually do anything he wanted to do on his own. He could just decide today that, well, let's just pretend he did it. All 2-year-old babies and under could be killed. And he just did it. He could decide today that if you're wearing glasses, you're no longer useful. That's the kind of stuff Christians in that day were dealing with. And then they came along, Nero did, and said, listen, if you say the name Jesus, or if you keep telling people you believe this guy, not try to get people to join you, but just say it, that it happened, we're going to throw you in a pit, and we're all going to gather together, buy tickets, and for our entertainment, watch you get killed by lions. And yet the message grew. There was no shortage of people to throw into the pit. Today, how much do you think they would have to look to find somebody to throw into the pit? Right? Do you believe that story about Jesus? It's kind of, I don't. Why? Why are you asking? Well, we're looking for some people to throw into a lion pit. Oh, no, it's kind of mythical. Nah, they told me about that when I was growing up, but I don't really believe it anymore. Forgive me, God. That's how you and I would be. But the message went, so I know that they weren't like that. I know that they were like, I believe it. Sorry, if you need willing guys, I guess I'm it. But you're not gonna. I cannot not tell you. Do you understand that? Do you understand the difference in I cannot not tell? And yet in our culture, it's I might tell. If the timing's right, if I don't think they'll get offended, if I think they're willing, if I think their heart's softened, if I think somebody hasn't already done it. We have everything. We have all the excuses in the world not to tell them. They just couldn't not tell them. Anybody. Everybody knew. And that's our problem. But now I got to ask you, do you think the church really matters? Do you think it matters? Or is it a segregated part of our culture? There's the church culture and has been since history, and then there's the world at large. Or do you think the church actually matters? So you need to formulate that answer in your mind. If the church actually matters at all. Think back to Rome. Think back to now. Think back to what we talk about in Sunday school, Nazi Germany. Think about, does the church actually matter? Think about your life. Think about the way you grew up. Think about the American system, the Western system. Think about it. Does the church really matter? I mean, think about it. If the church were to disappear, what would happen? I mean, other than being comforting at funerals and answering questions like, where do we go when we die? Will I see my loved one again? Will I know who my wife is if we both die up there? Other than answering those questions, if the church were disappeared, what impact would it have? How much different would our world be? Answer that about now, and then think back. How different would our world be now if the church hadn't been around? If there hadn't been an impact on culture? Has there been made any difference? And the answer, I'm going to tell you, is absolutely yes. But it is hard for you and I as Americans to appreciate. Because your idea of right and wrong, what's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable, what's not right, what's not acceptable, has so been impacted by Christianity that you don't understand how much the church has had a change on our culture. We don't understand just how far we've come. You and I were born with certain values taught to us. You started with your kids the same way, and you taught them certain things. And you may not even understand how many of those things you taught were influenced by the fact that back in Acts, a group of people believed so much that a man died and was buried and rose again and then went on to heaven and is going to come back. They so believe that that's why you're teaching certain things to your kids. It's become sometimes so natural, we're going to use that word in a minute, that we don't even understand where it all came from. I don't know if you know a guy named David Aikman. I'm going to use a lot of his stuff, but I'm going to just tell you one little quick story about David and what he did. And this is from the outside, looking at our Western culture. He was actually stationed in Beijing. He was the bureau chief for Time magazine for many, many years. And he was involved in a study where the Chinese government went to their Chinese scientists and they said, we want to know why the West is so blessed. We want to know why the West is so successful in their economics, in their politics, in their military. We want to know. And they sanctioned an entire group of scientists to go out and study you. You see, China has not always been a world power. But in the beginning of this, they wanted to know what made you tick. What was the secret sauce behind you? And they enlisted a guy, a Chinese scientist, who was deep indoctrinated in Maoism, which is a religion that I can't even understand them. Everything they believe. And he was sanctioned to come and study us and to find out exactly what made us tick and why we were one of the greatest success on the planet. Why are we the model? Why do we have the economic and political model of the rest of the world? Why is that? They wanted it, so they wanted to come and study us and find out. So they did that. They came and they studied, and they looked at us. And the guy says that we studied everything from the historical, political, economic, and cultural perspective. And at first, their first conclusion was they got bigger guns. I mean, isn't that kind of right? I mean, how many of you are, hoo-ha, mess with our military, and we'll show you who's boss, right? That's very natural. He said, at first, that's what we thought. Because we believe you got bigger guns, you got a better economy. Because nobody's going to mess with you. But then they thought that it was because we had the best political system. And they studied our political system, and they said, I don't think so. How many of y'all would agree? Not the best. And then they focused on our economics. They looked at our money and how we manage it and what we do. And then they figured out how much we had borrowed. Would you agree? Not exactly the best economic system to follow. Nope. But then the guy said this, in the past 20 years, we've realized that the heart of your culture is your religion, Christianity, specifically. This is from a Chinese scientist naturalist. The heart of the Western culture is religion, and specifically Christianity. It is why you've been made the way you are. That is why the West has been so powerful, he said. But see, you and I don't think that way. You and I think it's our economy. You and I think it's because we manage our money well. You and I think it's because of our Navy. We have really good ships, big ships. We think it's because we're bordered by oceans and we're protected, and that's why we're powerful. We believe it's because we have smart bombs, right? And smartphones. We believe we're smart, and that's what's made us the greatest power. You see, we're from the inside. We're so engrossed in it. It's been taught from so much of our life that you and I don't understand how much the church has actually impacted. But you see, these guys in China, they're going, what's the secret sauce? What have they done that's so different than us? And they found out it's Christianity. And to you, I'm sure you would respond the way I did. What? We're not even good Christians. We don't even have Christianity down right. And it's what's changing our culture. Here's the quote that he said. I think I gave it to you. Did I give it to you? The Christian moral foundation of social and cultural life was what made possible the emergence of capitalism and then the successful transition to democratic politics. We don't have any doubt about this. That's not just capitalism, but capitalism with a conscience. Where did a conscience come from? About 120 people flooded the streets of Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago, and they had a story that said, Jesus died, you killed him, you buried him, but that didn't hold him. He rose from the dead. And because of that, we have an awesome life to live. And he's given us something that you can't provide us. It's no fear, it's joy, it's forgiveness. We love you. We have no reason to love you, but we love you anyway. And because they did that, you're sitting where you are with the value system that you have. You didn't think that China was just starting to love God, do you? Do you understand that they kill a lot of missionaries in China, at least in the beginning? You know they don't kill as many missionaries now? That's why. Even the Chinese government has sanctioned so many churches, they have to give them a license to practice Christian church in China. You can go to a Christian church now in China as long as it's to a registered one. They haven't given up full control, but they understand the impact that the church is making on their country. And since then, there have been over 3 million Chinese per year coming to Jesus, their culture is changing. The way they live is changing a little. Now, they're still killing girl babies. They're still setting them on the steps. But there's a whole bunch of Christians out there going and picking them up now. Do you understand how big of an impact the church has on a culture? The church makes a difference. The church matters. There's one more quote that the guy said in the last one. Studies by Chinese sociologists reveal that in rural areas where traveling evangelists, we call them missionaries because supposedly we sent them, have introduced the Christian faith, opium addiction goes down, crime drops, Christian families grow wealthier than their neighbors. Now, I don't know if the government's got the right idea, and that's why they want Christianity, but I don't care. They at least understand that when the message of the gospel goes out, culture changes. It's something you and I have forgotten, and that's our problem. We think our culture is going to come back to Jesus. Listen, your culture was never in Jesus. You as Christians are in Jesus. And you as Christians have to impact culture with Jesus. You don't have to go save the world. You simply have to tell the story of who Jesus is and what he did in your life. And people change. And we're seeing in communist China that an entire country is being affected by people telling the story. I'm not going to go, I almost went somewhere. Decided not to. You and I think the way of life we have is natural. Now we're going to use the word right. You and I think that the way we are is just nature. It's our nature. Some people say human nature. I'll tell you right now, human nature is not the way you live right now. It is not natural for you to live the way you do, act the way you do, believe the things you believe. It is not natural. You ever, and I can prove this because you sit and you watch TV and you see what goes on in another country and you say something like, why do they act like that? Do they not know how to act? Do they not know that it's not right to give up girl babies just because they're not boys? Do they not know that they shouldn't let their people starve to death in the streets? Do they not know how to take care of the poor? Do they not know that? When are they going to grow up? That's the kind of things we say. That's how I know you and I think the way we are is natural. But it's not natural. We ask, why don't they do something about that? It's because they don't see the world the way you and I see the world, because they have not been impacted by the church. I never before this week believed so much that we as Christians, if you're a Christian, not as an American, because as an American you stink, but as a Christian, you're pretty good. We as Christians should be going places and telling people about Jesus, whether it's missionaries or whatever. I don't think you ought to go just on one little trip. I think you should change your life and go tell somebody about Jesus somewhere. And if it happens to be Fort Myers Beach or Fort Myers or Guatemala or wherever it is that you feel you should be telling the story of Jesus, you need to be going and doing it. Because if you don't, their culture is not going to be impacted with the gospel, and they'll never have what you have. And the early church believed that. The early church knew that. We're stewards of not just eternal life, but a better life right here on the planet. We represent a life that God promised is better than everything anybody else has. In every single area. But it's a byproduct of us following Him. Jesus and that story was the foundation of your heritage. Have you ever said our country was founded on Christian principles? You ever said that? And then you say something like, well, look at it today. Well, guess what happened? You happened. You quit impacting your culture with the story and message of Jesus. And you started worrying about how people were acting. And you tried to make people moral. And you tried to make people stop being a certain way and not worried about following a Christ. That's what happened. More on that in just a minute. Just soak on that. Go ahead and write it down. You can ask me about it later. So let's sort this out. And let's look at the way we think it's natural and why I think that's wrong. Because nature and what happens is nature is violent. It's not good. The natural world is not good. The natural world is an earthquake destroying a country. Nature is disease impacting an entire village or an entire people group. That's nature. Have you ever looked at a safari? Anybody ever been on a safari? Yes, John has. What's the first thing you want to see on a safari? A lion. That's right. Who said lion? Absolutely, a lion. But more importantly, what do you want to see a lion do? Kill something. Absolutely. It's like watching NASCAR. It's only for the wrecks. Other than that, it's a boring sport. But a safari, you want to see a lion and you want to see a lion kill something. That's nature. That's your nature. But here's what happens on a safari when a lion kills something. I watched a little video of a lion killing a buffalo. And a lion will kill the buffalo. Oh, in case you're a vegetarian or whatever, this happens all the time. Like, while we've been talking, 50 have died. You're going to need to get over it now. Okay, so buffalo dies. And then they show this video of out in the peripheral, the first thing that comes on. I made a list. Other animals begin to gather. First row out is a set of hyenas. And they sit on their haunches and they watch the lions eat the buffalo. And on the other outer ring of that, there's a group of buzzards sitting in trees, waiting in line. And behind that, there's a group of jackals. They're about this tall. And they're just sitting there waiting in line to get to the buffalo carcass. That's nature. It's the might is right mentality. First come, first serve. The hyenas do not charge in while the lions are feeding. After the lions get done feeding, they walk over to the edge of the ground and they, since they're males, take a nap. Every time, like clockwork. That's nature. Then the hyenas come in. Then the buzzards come in. And then the jackals clean up the bones. That's nature. It's violent. The way you act with one another is not nature. You've been impacted by something. Your nature has been changed. Nature is, if I have the money and you don't have the money, I'm in charge. I get to go first. You will never witness a lion look up to the second row, out to the hyenas and go, you know what? You go first. They're never going to get together and go, you know what? This is buzzard day. We killed it. We're going to let you have it. You're never going to get them to come up and go, and you know what? We would like to apologize to the rest of the buffalo. And we're going to do a better job and maybe not, be so violent to the buffalo. You're never going to witness that because that's nature. That's the natural course. That is what Lion King calls the circle of life. It's not going to change. That's nature. You and I would be the exact same way. But we've been impacted by something. We've been changed by something. That's the church. That's 120 people who decided to flood the streets of Jerusalem and say, hey, I saw a guy get killed. You did it. He raised from the dead after he was buried for 3 days. He went on up to be with God. Now he's coming back. And because of that story, you're not like a lion. And you're not like a hyena. You're not like nature. Nature, first come, first serve. That's not you. But human nature is no different. Here's what human nature is. Oh, I didn't give you this list. Let me give you a list. Human nature is racism. That's your human nature. Human nature is adultery. You see, well, racism is human nature because that's, I'm better than you because of something about me. Adultery is human nature. Adultery is have it with whoever you want, whenever you want to have it. If you don't like who you're having it with, go find somebody else to have it with. That's nature. Cheating. Cheating's nature. Some of you don't cheat simply because you're not allowed. IRS is coming right now, right? How many of y'all welcome enough people to come and double check your math? No. We sometimes don't cheat only because, and we're Christians. But it's nature to get as much as you can. It's in nature to keep as much as what you think is yours. That's nature. That's the natural. But you can't help that. Lying. There's another one. Slavery. First come, first serve. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Some of y'all have used that as a Bible verse. It's not. That's nature. We have to understand that the church has had a great impact on culture because it says we can establish and maintain a lifestyle that's far superior to nature. That's what the church said. The church looked at Rome and said, listen, you're not like us. We have a far superior way to do things than you do. And we're going to do it because we've been mandated to do so. And the love for the God that saved us forces us to do it. And we're willing to die because of it. And if you want to know about it, let me tell you about it. And here's where Paul talked about it, Galatians chapter 5. That wasn't really an intro, but it was kind of. What Paul's going to do is he's going to contrast what nature looks like and what people look like when left to their own devices and act that way versus what it looks like when we allow God to impact our life and change our natural way of thinking. And he will say, what if there were a group of people who allowed God to control their very behavior? What if a group of people gathered and decided to let Jesus change the way they think about people and how they treated other people? Then he will say, church, this is what you're supposed to look like. And if you're going to impact other people, this is what you got to have. Nothing else. You don't get to add to the list. There's a lot of us who like lists. He's given us 2 for you to analyze if you have, and put yourself in a category. Last week we said no categories and policies. This is your only exception. Yeah, category, center, policy, follow Jesus. Galatians 5, verse 16 is where we're going to start. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Whether you like it or not, if you go natural, it's not pretty. Well, I wouldn't think about that, but that's true too. If you let your natural appetites rule, it will be disaster. If you can you imagine that? Paul would say, sinful. Let's go. Verse 19. The acts of the flesh are obvious. Now, the reason they're obvious, it means when Paul is going to give you the list, none of you are going to go, ooh, people act like that? That's surprising. It's obvious because you know somebody like this list he's getting ready to give us. And you look at him in the mirror every single morning. You do. Obvious means, even though you haven't done some of them, if you thought you'd get by with it, you would. That's what he means by obvious. Let's look at the rest of that. Sexual immorality. You can put under that whatever you want to put under that. Because just as soon as you identify somebody who's sexually immoral, more sexually immoral than you just forgot about where you're sexually immoral. Okay? So that's pretty much everything. Impurity. Debauchery. How many of y'all used debauchery in a sentence in the past week? No, we just don't do that. But here's what it means. And this is PG-13. We're probably okay. It means sex with anybody, anywhere, at any time that I decide. Now, let me talk to guys for just a minute. What would our culture look like if we just let that go? The 60s. Yeah. I wasn't there. Sorry. But yeah. Actually, probably that times 1,000,000. Did you know there was a time when that happened? Long about 2,000 years ago, when a group of people flooded the streets of Jerusalem and said, hey, there's a guy that y'all killed. He died. He was buried and resurrected from the dead, and he's going to come back. At the same time, Roman culture was debauchery. You can have whatever you want, and if you want it, go get it. I don't care if they're Christian or non-Christian, just go get them. Take it. It's yours. If they fight, kill them. Have sex with the body. That's what it was. That's the planet that these guys were living in. When they were stepping out going, I cannot not tell you. There's no way for me to not tell you this story of Jesus. That's what they were living with. That. Debauchery. Anytime. And then it happened many more times. You know what a king reign is, right? What the king says goes. Kings and noblemen, they lived debauchery. Our planet had just eons and eons of years of just people living like that, doing what they wanted to do because that's what they wanted to be right. Can you imagine if your culture was living like that? How safe would your daughters be? How safe would your wives be? How safe would you be? How safe from others would they be from you? It'd be horrible. I'm just glad somebody put the brakes on our society in this area. There was a group of about 120 people who flooded the streets of Jerusalem and decided they wanted to tell people that a man died and was resurrected from the dead. And stop that. Verse 20. He keeps going with the list. We're not going to go on with the list, evidently. There it is. Idolatry. Idolatry. Y'all know what idolatry still, right? We got over that a long time ago. No, you didn't. Idolatry is, I don't mind making you feel bad if it keeps you from scratching my car. I don't mind making you feel bad as long as it protects my hardwood floors at my house. Whatever it is. Idolatry is elevating stuff over people, no matter what it is. That's idolatry. Some of us may have slipped a little bit. Witchcraft, that's thinking you can control the spiritual elements. Thinking you've got any play in the spiritual realm. Folks, Christians kind of dabble in this a little bit. You know, by telling God what to do. Like telling God, I bind Satan. Like telling God, you do all kinds of stuff in the spiritual realm. That's witchcraft. You got no rule. You got no plan. You got nothing up there. Okay? Hatred. Discord. Y'all know anybody like that? Y'all should come on Wednesday nights. Jealousy. Jealousy. Anybody jealous? Why did just the women raise their hand? I know, lots of women, only they hate skinny people. Men, you hate rich guys. You ever walk by a car? Said, I hate that guy. Well, who is he? I don't know. What's he look like? I don't know. Why do you hate him? It's his car. We're like that. Men, women, whatever it is, that we're just like that. The jealousy that creeps into our life. Can you imagine if the church had an impact, what it would look like? Because your jealousy, with a no-holds-barred attitude, you would just off the guy and take his car. Aren't you glad that that's not the norm? That's just the exception? But the rule is that you just don't do that? Aren't you glad that the rule is you keep some of that to yourself as much as you can? And you know whenever you think that about somebody who weighs less than you, or you think is prettier than you, and when you think that about them, that conscience inside of you goes, what the heck is wrong with you? Why are you thinking that way? Because the church so impacted our culture. You don't realize that it's the Jesus in you making you think that way. You think it's just because you're pretty good. You know, it's almost impossible to celebrate someone else's success. Something good happens to somebody, you will find a fault in it somewhere. Especially if they get elevated a little above you. You watch somebody win the lottery, what do you immediately say? Oh, that'll change them. I'm glad it's not me. I wouldn't. You've all said it. I'm just glad that's a big problem they've got that I don't want. Was lying in the list? It was, right in the beginning. It was, lying. Yeah. And then the rest. Fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions. That's nature. That's what nature looks like. You see some of that in your life. You did not get surprised when you see that thing and you're like, nah. It's like it. Do you know why we have laws? That's why we have laws. Nature. Because nature pushes us in those directions, and it requires us to have laws to keep us from going over them. That's the only reason we have laws. The law says, left to your own, you're bad. Laws are the reason that some of you are as good as you are. You allow law to control your desire. But why do we have law? Because God told us that's nature. And you're going to need something. I hope it's not just regular law that keeps you from being those things. From going off in a fit of rage and killing somebody. I hope it's not the law. Why is it then with the IRS? I can't lie. They won't let me. You ever said that? You're letting law decide. But Paul says there's another picture. Verse 22 at the beginning. Oh, wait, there's more. Holy cow. That's not what he said. Yeah, it is. And envy and drunkenness and orgies and the like. Wow, he got worse. I warn you today before that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, for many of you, that becomes your mantra, and you go tell people who are acting like that, they're having orgies and are drunk, that they're going to hell. And while that's true, the reason it's in here is for you and I to understand that we're not like that. We're not like that. We're changed. Why are you changed? Are you changed simply because you stopped being drunk? Are you changed simply because you stopped having orgies? Are you changed simply because you stopped having fits of rage? Is that why you're changed? No. You're changed because somebody told you about the message of a guy who died, was buried, rose again, and is coming back. And you now have a joy that keeps you from doing those things. Not because you don't do them anymore, but simply because of the guy inside of you who changed you. We'll never change people by having them stop doing those things. It's just not going to happen. Yeah, it's true. They're not going to inherit the kingdom of God, but neither will you, if you like that. Now, here we go. Here's what he says. I think. But the fruit of the Spirit is. Now he's going to tell us. Okay, so that's nature. Now here's what it looks like on the other side. And here's where some of you really want your list. And you know why you want your list? Because you're looking for people who are acting like this. And you're looking for people who are acting like the first list and say they're on this list. So that you can say, you're not on that list. You're not on that list. You're acting bad. And if you're not in this list, you got to be on the other list. Listen, it's for you to take inventory of your life. And it's for you to realize what you would be doing if you weren't on this list. He says there's a better way. Here's what he says. The Spirit is love. It's joy. It's peace. You have any of those things? Of course you do. If you allow the Spirit to control your life, of course you do. You have love, and you have joy, and you have peace. What he's saying is the Spirit is the thing that informs your conscience that maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I shouldn't act that way. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Does the church matter? Did the church change the way you're living today? It absolutely did. It's the Spirit that, even if there weren't any laws, would encourage you to do the right thing. It is different than nature. It is starkly contrasted. Love is, you first. Love is, I'll sacrifice even though there's nothing coming back to me. Even though I worked for it, I'm going to give it to you. That's love. That's sacrifice. That's what Spirit living in. Peace. Listen, peace is go with nature, have an affair, do what you want to do. Know what you don't have if you're having an affair, or if you've had an affair, you know what you don't have? Peace. It'll mess you up. Nature will mess you up, and you won't have that. Kindness. Paul wrote this when Rome ruled the world, and kindness wasn't in their dictionary. They didn't have a definition for kindness. It was might makes right. Emperor knows best. Didn't matter if it was kind or not. Nobody looked at a Roman and went, there's a nice guy. They just didn't. But Paul is saying, your way is different. When you're following the Spirit, it looks different. Faithfulness. It says, I said I will, so I will. Faithfulness says, I said I would stick by you, good or bad, and I will. Guys, faithfulness is what you want your son-in-laws to have. Faithfulness is what you want your families to have. Faithfulness is controlled by the Spirit. Self-control runs contrary to everything you and I want to do. Faithfulness. Oh, yeah, I jumped on self-control. Sorry. What if we had self-control month? Just for 1 month. We could start with the church, maybe our state or whatever, but what if they let us be in charge and we said, self-control month. For 1 month, everybody is going to have complete, perfect self-control. What would it look like? You'd lose weight, you'd get fitter, your families would be better, men would be the best husbands ever, wives would be the best wives ever. If you had self-control day, you wouldn't have to have any of the other list. I mean, if we could get self-control right, can you imagine? AA would be out of business. Weight Watchers would be out of business. All those things that you have to rely on because you do not have self-control. What does that say about you? Does that mean God doesn't live in you? It means you're not walking by the Spirit. It means you don't necessarily believe that about 2,000 years ago, 120 people flooded the streets of Jerusalem and told a bunch of people that there was a guy about a couple of months before that had died, was buried and rose again, went on to live in heaven and is coming back. You don't really believe that. Because they couldn't not tell. And Paul says if you're living this life, if you're allowing the Spirit to control you, to be your hands and feet, to tell you what to do and where to go if you're doing that, this is the list that you look like. This is the thing. Listen, the message of the church matters. And then, look at this. Paul ends with the greatest insight in this whole book. Or in the book of Galatians, for sure. And I bet you've read over it, didn't even kind of pay attention to it. Let's look what he says. The very last line of that. Against such things, what? There is no law. You just kind of read by that, right? Normally, you're like, that's a good thought. But let's look at it for just a minute. How important that statement really is. How many times have you ever witnessed somebody go, listen, you've had too much patience, and if you don't chill out, okay, wait a minute. If you don't stop chilling out, I'm going to come knock your block off. I mean, how many wives and husbands have gotten together and went to marriage counseling, and the counselor went, you know what, the problem is you got too much love. Now, at my house, you might ask my kids, and they may say something like that. We try to embarrass our kids on a regular basis. But it's just not going to happen. Nobody's going to come up and make a law about gentleness. Listen, you're being too gentle. You're being too kind. You've got too much joy. That may not be a good example. Nobody's going to make a law about that. You know why? Because there is no need for a law for that. When you're not acting natural, you don't need a law. When you're walking in the Spirit, law starts to diminish. There are less and less laws when we act in the Spirit. If a husband and a wife were to actually walk in the Spirit in their marriage, there wouldn't be any of that. You can't do that. You can't say that. You're not supposed to do that. There wouldn't be any of that. Those are laws that you're saying out there. When our families would be like that, there would be less and less like our families wouldn't get, you need to be this, you need to do that. The laws go down. The more you and I act in the Spirit, the less law need there is. Does the message of the church matter? Because when you're doing that, suddenly what you're saying is, it's not about me anymore. What you're saying is, I matter less than you matter. And when we start acting like that, there's no need for law. You don't need protection from me by a law if I believe you're more valuable than I am. How many of you really believe that, though? You see, the message of the church impacted our culture so much that you just think that's natural now. You think that you're not out murdering people simply because there's a law that says you can't. And that's not true. You're not out murdering people because a group of people flooded the streets of Jerusalem and told about 1,000 people that Jesus had died, was buried, and rose again. And that's why you now think it's natural to act this way. But it's not. So what are you going to do about it? I asked you if you'd ever said this country was founded on Christian principles, and you said, yeah, I've said that. And I asked you what happened, and told you happened. So now what's going to happen? Yes, we're still going to have a country. Yes, we're still going to have laws that were created so that our culture could be impacted. Awesome. But how many of you have lately said, this place is going to hell in a handbasket? Yes? Absolutely. I cannot believe people think that's okay. You said that? I cannot believe that doesn't bother somebody. Anybody said that? The reason they don't believe it's wrong is because you and I have turned inside. And we don't realize the message of the church matters that much to the culture around us. And if you and I don't share the message of to the culture, then the culture is going to change. And you and I will be caught in our church buildings wondering why in the world people think it's okay to sleep with one another. And they're both boys and they're both girls. And we're going to wonder why they think it's okay to have abortions. We're going to think, why do they think that's fine? It's because you didn't believe your message would impact the culture very much, so you kept your mouth shut, and you came to church, and you had a great time, and then you went to work, and you let people tell you to mind your own business, and you did. Because every time you opened your mouth, you opened it up and put your foot in it. And your message wasn't, Jesus died, He's changed my life. It's, you're wrong, you're going to hell. They're okay going to hell because they think you're going to heaven and they don't want to be near you. Think about it. Think of all the people that hate you. They're okay. The message never changed. You and I changed, and that's our problem. If we were living by the Spirit, you would never tell somebody that God hates them. Where in that list can you find that? Where? Where in that list would you find the audacity to walk up to a homosexual and say, you're an idiot? You're so filthy. God hates you. Where would you find that? Where are you getting that charge? No, you're getting that charge because you're better than them. You're smarter than them. You're more prideful than them. It's not race, but you're a racist. Where would you get that? How do you get the Spirit of God to tell somebody that? You don't. You just change the message. Well, I'm not going to accept their way of life. Well, guess what? God accepted your way of life. And you stunk. I'm not going to condone it. Praise God, don't condone it. But what is your message? What is your message? Jesus loved them. And He died for them. And then He was buried. And then He rose again. Well, they're not getting it. Well, you're not going to help it. You're not going to fix it by changing the message. Stick to the message. You see, it's the church who says, men, love your wife like Christ loved the church. It's the church that says that. It's the church who is sending out Christians to adopt little girls who are left on the steps of orphanages. It's Christians who are pushing that. It's Christians who are saying girls are just as valuable as boys all over this planet. It's the church that says God created everybody the same. That's the church that's saying that. It's the church that says forgive because you've been forgiven, not eye for an eye. It's the church that says accept, just like you were accepted. It's the church that says love your enemies. Who says that stuff? Currently, not many Christians. But it's the church that says it. It's the churches who says abortion's not the best solution. There's a better way. It's not the church that walks up with a sign and says, you're a fool. You're going to hell for killing your baby. They may be going to hell, but it might be because you're not giving them the right message. I don't know. All right, so does your message matter? You better believe it. We have the message of eternal life and a better life. And that's your message. And you better believe it changes the culture around you as long as you share it. Our message that we were given shaped the West and continues to shape our culture as long as you and I will spread it. One quick story and we're gone. Adrian Rogers was on a plane. Y'all know who Adrian Rogers was. He died in 2007. Really good preacher. Had the preacher voice, the one everybody tries to get. There's a class, how to speak. It's Adrian Rogers. They play for you when you're there. Yeah, it's just as stupid as it sounds. You're right. He was on an airplane. They'd taken off, folded his or his table down, put his Bible out. He had the King James Version of the Holy Bible. And he told that story, and he opened it up, and he started reading. There was a guy next to him reading a magazine. The guy, just a couple of seconds later, folded his magazine up, looked over at him, and says, "Why do you read that book?" And Adrian Rogers says, "I had one sound bite to give him. I knew I only had one little bit to tell him. I couldn't go into everything. It was one little thing. What could I say?" And Adrian said, "I told him, by reading this book, I have realized that man has three problems: sin, sorrow, and death. And I have found the answer to all three of those problems in this book." And the man said, and picked up his magazine. Adrian said a long time went by, about half the flight. And finally the man folded his magazine up, laid it back down, and says, "Okay, I have sat here this whole time and tried to identify a problem that doesn't fall within sin, sorrow, or death, and I cannot do it. So I want to know more." And Adrian got to spend the rest of the flight telling him about a guy who died, was buried, and rose again, and provided an answer to sin, sorrow, and death. Your message matters. Your problem is how you're going to deliver it, how you're going to get it out. There's a big problem out there, and you're the only one that knows the answer. We got to get it to them. That's the church. That's the church. Let's stand and we'll begin.